Hello, guys. Good afternoon. We have another guest, a special guest, Jans Claessens, and we'll have another talk. So please to have a big applause for him.
Hello. Hello, hello. All right, so yeah, yesterday I had a talk and we're working on this character design. So today I'm just gonna continue where I left off, basically, to work on this character design. So this is what I did yesterday, right? So I'm gonna continue from here. Sometimes when I paint, like I feel like I overdid it, like overstated stuff. Right? What happened now is like the angle of the face changed a bit. Like the mouth was better before, right? So often I do something like I lower the opacity, and then you kind of get like a lower resolution, less detail, less value difference, and then you can kind of like rework stuff. I think what I want to do is like show more of her face. Right. Oops. So let's copy this. Put the. Gonna turn it a bit, and then erase that line. Right. So now we see a little bit more of her face. Just remove that extra line there. So I want to talk like real quick about like shading strategy. If you want to shade your character, right? So what you want to do is you want to think of like the really big value structure first. Like if you have a complicated character, right? The thing you can do is you can first in your head, right? I do it in my head. But it's useful to do something like this, when you're beginning, right, is to create like a very simple schematic of your character, right? So let's talk about like how it works for a face. Like if you want to, shade a face, right? We can draw something like, basically the way, if you simplify it down to like its basic shape, right? The face is just like an egg, basically, right? That's all there is to it. Let's say we have this character, right? This would be the schematic, right? Here's the shadow, right? And then the shadow is somewhere, right? There's no shadow. The shadow is somewhere all the way, on the ground plane, right? So this is a schematic, right? That's all there's to it. Like this is the face. Like the face is basically, it's an egg, and you add like a nose to it, right? So that's the face. This is the schematic of a face, and then you have two eye sockets, right? And then you have the mouth, then you have this line, right? So that's the schematic of the face, right? What I mean by that is that we're always looking for like the shadow shapes, right? So if you have an object that's being lit by a light source, right? It divides the object into light and shadow, right? If you have something like a cone, the shadow is a little bit different, right? So those are primitives, right? And if we draw something complicated, right? It's easy to like create this stuff, like recreate a very basic version of what you're drawing with primitives, right? So in this case, so the idea here is to have like, it's quite a static figure, right? Like you have a female looking head, and then there's like these layers, kind of like flower petals. So that's the idea, right? So like flower petals opening, right? So for like the shading strategy, like if you want to shade this, right? And it's what you can do is like you create a schematic, you have a sphere, right, for the head, then basically, right, I just have this thing like that, right? That's the body, right? And then I have two of these things, right? And this is just a basic, right? And this is what I have to figure the shadow out from, right? So you have basically a cylinder, right? The shadow is just, right? So you have a real full light there, right? There's not a lot of true shadow, right? So I often pick my light sources, so I have very little shadow, right? I love working with midtones. So if you look at this character, right, I take the shadow, so it's, if you have this nose, for example, right, it's obscuring a part where there would be shadow, right? There's shadow on the other side of the nose, right? But I pick my lighting, so not a lot of those cast shadows are visible, right? So in this case, I would have a little bit shadow there underneath the mouth, right? So what I really like is working with midtones and doing the form painting, the modeling, right? So very subtle shifts in value, right? So, oops, that's not what I meant to do, right? So before I change the subject matter too much, right? If you look at the schematic of what I'm making, right? So we have our egg, we have the shadow here. There's gonna be some interaction with this second flower petal, right? There might be some interaction here from the shadow from this shape onto the sphere, right? So, and then this part might be in shadow, the bottom of the petal, right? And then there's gonna be a gradient like this, right? So this is the schematic, right? She's a bit taller than that, like this, right? And then whatever happens after that, it's not that relevant. Her nose, her eye socket, right? So something like that. So you draw like a little puppet version of what you're drawing, right? Right now my drawing is kind of simple, right? Let's say you have like a face, right, like this, and the guy is like leaning forward, something like that, like an old man, right? Right? Then stuff becomes like a little bit more complicated, right? And I can show you like how, before you start shading this, people will do like, they'll start from the white, they'll start like, okay, I need a bit of value there, I need a little bit of value on the face. Let's make him look a bit better, because we like nice looking stuff. Okay, he's an old man right there. And he has big ears. All right, okay, some hair. All right, right, so, and people will leave like a lot of white on the page, right? And I say a lot of times, people, they see depth, right? When you add shading, oh, I'm adding depth, right? But they don't really see flatness, right? So the rule with modeling, when you're shading, is that every time the angle of the plane changes in relation to the light source, right, something needs to happen to the value, right? If you have a plane that's, I know you can watch my hand, like this is 100% brightness, right? If you turn the plane away from the light source, it's gonna get a little bit darker, right? If you turn it, it gets darker, 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 until it's so far turned away that it becomes shadow, right? So that's the modeling you need to do, right? So in this case, right, you have your sphere, which is positioned something like this, right? I'm not good at drawing spheres and stuff, but you get the point. And then the second shape you have here, right, is this cylinder, right? And I'm just gonna draw it completely separate, right? You could just put it, if it helps you, just put it there, so you don't see the other thing, right? And it's gonna help you, right? So If I want to shade this and the light source coming from here, right? This plane is catching the light, right? So all of this needs to be darker, right? Now I'm shading this sphere. I'm not looking at that anymore, right? The lightest part is here on the top, so I'm gonna shade it just like this, right? And the shadow is gonna be, it's gonna be like right here, right? So now we have to just, what we have to do is just, we have to put these two shapes together, right? Like maybe that's a little bit too much. Like let's say this is not dark enough. Like this is shadow, right? That's all in shadow, and this is the light, right? And for the face, the same thing. This is all shadow, like this, right? The light source coming from there, right? And then all we have to do is put these two shapes together, right? I'm just gonna move this to a different layer, right? And then make those two objects interact with each other, right? So, okay, the face here is covering part of that sphere, right? So we lose that plane that would otherwise be in the light, right? And now we just have to like make these two shapes interact, right? So there's going to be some ambient occlusion, for example, right? Let's say we add another shape, right? We're adding this shape to it, right? Okay, now that's our nose, right? So now we have to make these two shapes interact with each other. What's going to happen? The overall lighting is going to be the same. There's just going to be a cast shadow from the nose onto the character, right? So that's what I mean by simplifying stuff, right? So now if we're going to shade this character, we already know, oh, this entire neck needs to have some kind of value, right? Or we're not working in this, right? We have to make sure we go from that very general lighting to a more specific, right? So now we have to do something like this, right? And then we have our like, basically we have our value schematic, right? Our value configuration, right? And that's how we can like easily shade these characters, right? And those schematics can become like, the more complicated your character, of course, the more complicated the schematic would be, right? But it's still easier to picture the lighting if you do this first, right? And what I was saying, like we also have to learn how to see flatness, right? So right now you can see I added like a lot of volume, right? And it doesn't look bad, it's starting to look a little bit more three-dimensional, right? But what I mean is we have to see flatness is that this is the part where what people like ignore, right? Right now you have this giant shape that is just white, right? What does that mean? If something is the same value, it means it's like one single plane, right? So if you would look at this character from the side, right, he'd just have a face like this, right? It's just like a flat face, right? All of this would be flat, right? And also like all of his cheek, right? And if you're doing like realistic drawing, everything has roundness to it, right? So often I'll see like mistakes if I see like people draw something like the chin area, right? They'll do something like this, right? They'll have the mouth. They'll do this line, right? And they do some shading here, right? But then they leave all of this stuff, they leave the same value, right? Let's draw a nose, right? They'll do something, the shading will look not bad, but they'll just leave all of this stuff the same, right? But you have to realize, okay, you have the egg shape of the face, then you have like a little ball basically being inserted, right? That's the chin, right? So again, you have two shapes, right? You have the sphere. You're shading this, imagine you're shading this sphere, right? And now you shade a little ball like that, right? And you just put them on top of each other, right? So that's basically how you need to see this, right? So in case here, right, you have to have this part is part of the main shape, right? And then the chin here is part of the secondary shape, right? So what we're doing is basically we're creating shapes and then we're adding stuff to it, right? We add a little ball for the chin, we add the eyebrows, the brow ridges and stuff, right? And those are like the sub, and the nose and stuff, right? So those are like the sub shapes you're adding, right? So you're going from a very general shape to more specific, right? So when I'm gonna render this character, right? First of all, I want to get rid of all the white, right? Except maybe in the places where in the end my highlights are going to be, right? So usually when I do shading, like I'll cover everything, right? And this is like a base layer, right? So I do it in kind of a hatching way. In the end, it will just appear as a texture. It's not that important, right? But I make sure I cover everything, so I remove all the white, right? Oops, sorry. So I'll keep like a couple of places where I know there's gonna be some specular highlights and stuff. Right? And as for the hatching direction, I'm always working with anatomical edges, right? So you have to, the way I see edges, maybe people have seen like these images, you have a soft edge, you have a lost edge, you have a hard edge, right? I think it's a bit confusing, right? What I see as edges, like why do we draw lines, right? So when we draw lines, we draw them because the face, in nature, there are really, lines don't really exist, right? But when we draw, we have like, I'm going to draw something, I'm going to put a line somewhere, right? But why do we put the line in this place? Usually it's because there's a lot of contrast in a place, right? So when we draw an eye, right, the upper eyelid has the most contrast together with the pupil. So that's why we put the lines there, right? Often people will put lines in places where there's not enough contrast, right? So if you draw this line this hard, right? There's a line there, right? But there's just like in the full picture, there's not enough contrast for you to put like a dark line there, right? So that's the reason why if you draw like a girl, you want to draw a pretty girl or something, or a pretty boy, right? And you put this line, suddenly it looks like 20 years older, right? It's because, you're putting a really dark line in a place where there's really no contrast, right? So if you want to put a line there, you have to switch, you have to just draw the line in a different value, right? You can draw this line in a very soft value and it won't have like that strong effect, right? If you look at a face, there's really not a lot of contrast, places with a lot of contrast. It comes down to this schematic, right? A face will have, the eyebrows will have contrast, the top of the eyelids, this one, right? The mouth, and then down the bottom there, I don't even count like the lower eyelid, it does not have that much contrast, right? When I draw the lower eyelid, I always take like a lighter value and I paint it in like that, right? So yeah, talking about edges. So when I shade, right, I go from edge to edge. So let's say you have so an edge is like, so you have like the edge of the form, right? That's a very clear edge, right? And all of these like sub forms, like you have, for example, here you would have this shape for the brow ridges. You have here the edge of the form, right? this would have an edge. There's an edge here, right? And it's key to finding these edges inside of your drawing, right? Some edges are very obvious, like the mouth underneath there, right? And some are going to be more subtle, right? Here you have like this line from your skull, right? So often like these edges are very, very subtle, and it's hard to find them, right? I like to sometimes do like an edge study. If you open a photograph and you mark all the edges, right? So why is this important? Like when you're going to like render form, right? I see it as a little bit as this. Like imagine you have a sheet of paper, right? And you fold the paper, you get something like this, right? And this is what people would call a hard edge, right? You fold a piece of paper, you just get two planes, one is light, one is in shadow, right? But now imagine if you, instead of folding this piece of paper, right? We draw it again, but we just gently bend it, right? We're not like creasing the paper, right? And now you get something like this. This is still in shadow, right? But the transition between the two planes happens a lot slower, right? Here you have an instant transition, right? It goes from gray to white, right? Here the form is turning way more slowly. I'm just gonna remove this weird face here. Oops, it's in my way. Let's go back here. All right, it's gone, all right? All right, now imagine we do it even slower, right? We take the piece of paper, we bend it like this, right? Now we have an even slower transition, right? Compared to the previous one, right? And we can imagine we do this like something like this, right? So we can just imagine we can do it this in a million ways, right? So this is what I'm talking, when we're doing form painting, right? We have to realize, when we're moving from one shape to the other, how fast this form is turning, right? And in the face, you'll have like clues, right? So here you have the profile, right? This is not the profile, right? But here you have a clue of how fast this form is turning, right? If you would have a person and his face would do this, right? Now we're dealing with, right? And he's just made of paper, right? We could have like an instant transition, right? And it would be something like our first example, right? But human beings are not made of paper. We all know that, right? So the transition goes a lot more slowly, right? But we can also imagine other things, right? Let's say we have our piece of paper, and we're just creasing it in one side, right? And we're not creasing it at this side, right? Now we're getting like a complex edge, right? It's an edge that's going from hard to soft, basically, right? So here you would have, on one side, this edge would be like sharp, and then on the other side, it becomes softer and softer, right? That's another possibility. Now, take, for example, here, the cheekbone, right? The cheekbone starts out at the corner of the ear, starts out pretty soft, right? And then it becomes softer, right? So that's important when we're shading, right? So you have to understand like the way this form is transitioning, right? You have a hard edge, and then it turns into a soft edge, right? We have a hard edge that turns into a soft edge, right? So this is how I think about it, right? And as for the direction of my strokes, right? I'm always following stuff from edge to edge, right? So I'm starting from one edge, right? And I'm transitioning, I'm shading in the direction of the light, right? But each time I'm reaching a certain like bump, right? So I'm imagining I'm shading an egg, right? I'm gonna go from dark to light, right? The lightest part is here, right? So I'm gonna be rendering in all directions, right? From there to there, from from there. You know, like I would be shading an egg, right? You have the egg, the shadow is like this, right? If I would render it, I would render it from edge to, like, from the shadow edge to the object edge, right? So I start from the terminator, right? You have an object with terminator, right? I start from here. I render in the direction of the light, right? From all directions, right? And I'm going from edge to edge. Well, what happens with the face is that sometimes you get a little bump, right? And that's another edge. Like, imagine there's a little bump here, right? And we can draw this as an edge, right? Let's say there's a couple of those, right? Maybe not make it too hard for myself. Let's just say there's one, right? So now I'm gonna render up until this line, right? And then I'm gonna continue forward from that line, right? So that's how I like display this little bump, right? I'm going from edge to edge, right? So right there. And sometimes the bump is enough to like put it back into shadow, right? If you have like a very deep crease, sorry.
We'll have like 5-7 minutes, and then we'll have questions.
Okay, good. Yeah, so imagine this guy is very skinny, right? And this is very deep. This thing might be pushed back into shadow, right? So I'm gonna render from this edge, right? I'm gonna go in this direction. Oops. Oh, I have to be here. Right, till I reach that edge, and then I'm gonna continue from that edge, right? So we're rendering from edge to edge, and the direction is always along the edge, right? So if there's an edge here, let's say there's like his eyebrows, his like he has like a wrinkle there, right? I'm always going to be shading like in the direction of the edge, right? And then where two edges meet, you kind of have to find a way to merge them, right? So for example, oops, right? You have, right? You have an edge here, right? You have this edge, you have this edge, like that, right? And then you have this edge, right? So when you reach this place, you have to start changing your strokes, right? So here, the strokes are going this way, right? And then you have to find a way to kind of blend these together, right? So this may be a better example, right? We're going from this edge to that edge, like that. And then you have to find a way to blend those together, right? So this is how the shading works. You know, in the ear, there's, don't know why that happens, but yeah, in the ear, there's a lot of like fun edges, right? So I'm going in the direction of the light, right? So the lightest part is going to be here, right? And there's always one side that is hard, you know, like if you have an edge, right? There's always like a harder part and a softer part, right? So if you have the edge, this is kind of what you can practice, is like doing this type of strokes, right? Cool. So yeah, now I'm I was supposed to like render this guy more, but I will do that now. So now that I made that schematic, you know, things become a lot more simple, right? So I know I cannot put too many values in the face, right? Because the entire face is not in shadow, right? There's only just a little bit of shadow, right? So this black value here that I have, right? That's the shadow, right? I cannot have this value anywhere in the light, right? So this is the schematic. I don't know. This is the schematic, like this, right? So that dark value is reserved for whatever is shadow, right? All of this is light, so I cannot use this black value anywhere. Instead, maybe like, you know, in the eyes somewhere here, right? Yeah, and then I'll just be following that and rendering stuff out.
Sorry for interruption, but slowly we can move to asking questions. Jens, you still can draw, and
Okay.
we'll be still watching. I would love to watch you for a whole night, just drawing and doing stuff. But while he's doing his magic, for people who has questions, just raise a hand, and I will come up here. Yeah.
Hi, I guess I was wondering when you're doing more like just line or without a lot of complex shading stuff with pen and everything, do you translate a bit of this concept with line weight? How do you go about that? Because I
Yeah.
always struggle.
So I'm always, even when let's say I'm drawing with ballpoint pen, right? And like all my, everything I do, like I don't have like a specific way of doing line. Let's say I'm doing line, right? I'll use this concept like if I have like for example a line that turns into like a soft edge, I'll do something like this, right? This is a hard line, right? This is a softer line. This is an even softer line, right? So by doing that, I can kind of show, right? Let's say I have a face here, right? Like if I want to show a soft edge, I'll do something like this, right? I'll like mark the place, I'll mark the edge, and I'll like flare out the line like this to show like softness, right? So when I'm drawing, I'm already making notes on how the form is turning, right? So let's say you have this brow ridge right here, right? I'll do this, and I'll just put two lines, right? If I put two lines here, I see the direction of the shading, right? I put three lines here. Now I feel like, if I continue this, I'll have form, right? So if I do the eye, for example, I'll do something like this, right? I'll draw the top of the eyelid, right? And I'll draw like that soft fat pocket here, like the edge of the, right? You have the skull like that, right? You have this edge, right? Like that edge there. Like I'll draw that like softly, right? So this is how I see, like I don't really see line as just something that's like singular, right? Like you have, this is a line, right? For me, the important part is showing the form, right? So if I use the line a bit more like, not like, I'm drawing a line, so it has to be just a line, right? That just like kills your, it kills like the fluency of everything, right? So that's often the reason why, people, they'll draw like an amazing sketch, and then they say, oh, I'm gonna transform it into a line drawing, right? And suddenly like their sketch is just like dead, right? It's because in the sketch you had all these different like, sketchy lines that kind of enforce the form, right? And then if you transition to just like doing like clean line, things are going to start, things will just look, like very sterile, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. When drawing, do you decide if you're exposing to light or to dark? And do you use any inking techniques or fundamentals when you're drawing?
Sorry?
If you're using any inking fundamentals of line when you're drawing, and when you're exposing and using gradients, as you're showing right now, do you think where to expose, or where is the light, or if you're exposing to darkness or to the light?
Yeah, it's something I think if the question is about like exposure and like, I kind of think of, right, there's like, you can choose to work like high key or low key, let's say if I can show you like, in my sketchbook maybe. Right, I think a good example is somewhere around here. Let me check. Like this is a good example, right? So this drawing is like a lot more low key, right? It's a white guy, you know, he's not like, he doesn't have dark skin, right? But you just make everything a lot darker, right? In general, it's that's also a decision you have to make in the beginning, right? The way I choose the lighting is, you know, in the beginning I can just choose, you know, let's say we're drawing a face, right? And we know we cannot like mix up the values of the light and the values of the shadow. What I do in the beginning is I choose the range of my shadow, right? So here's like, that's just like how, you know, these are all the values, right? If I say, my shadows, the lightest part of my shadow will be this, right? So I can just cover all my shadows in this tone, right? I know the shadow can only get darker now, right? And what does that mean? It means that I pick this, it means that I have all the rest of the values left to do my light, right? And the only thing you have to do is like leave a little gap to do the, right? To do the light, right? And now you have all this section to do the light, right? But you could just choose to render like, you know, make everything quite dark and just use like that part, right? But if you say, this is my shadow, right? I'm gonna draw this again, right? This is my lightest, right? You cannot pick like values that are here, right? If you're working in the light, it's gonna not look like light, right? I don't know if this answers your question, but yeah, I thought this was this was about like exposure, but I can show you like another drawing where I have this. Oh yeah, that's here, right? So in this case, right, this is just like a way different lighting situation, right? The shadows are a lot darker, like compared to this one, right? So that's just like a scene, you know, like a character in a very bright room or something, right? And this is just very dimly lit, right? So we're just working with a different value range, right? So that's a low key value range, right? So the shadows are like all the way down here, and we're only using like this section of our values, right? Okay. Different question?
No, thank you. Okay, we have time for one more question. Just raise a hand. Don't be afraid. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so question for me is like, in terms of hours, how much time you spend on drawing per day, like roughly?
Well, I'd say I just like I keep just like a kind of like a 9 to 5 kind of thing.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, I'm sure there's like people working like 12 hours a day. You know, like some comic artists do, right? But I don't think you should like I think it's possible to become a good artist and still like go to a party or two. You know, like you don't have to like just stay home. I think if you're like working hard during the week, you still have the weekend left, you know, and you should take the weekend to do like other stuff too, right? Because it's very easy to burn out, right? And you need some time to add to your inspiration, right? If you never like encounter anything, it's gonna be hard to make interesting drawings, right? If you never go out, you don't know, like if you want to be a character designer and you never go out, you don't actually know what people look like, you know, you just have your own mirror image. So it's not enough to like create good characters. What I like to do is like when I go, when I bring my kids to school, right? And when I come back, I often try to just like see, you know, like remember people like I see on the street, right? So I could draw like people I see in my town, like from memory, right? Like I know like every morning I see this guy who has like this like he has like this bag and it's like these Kipling monkeys, like 20 of them. Like I could draw this guy from memory, for example, right? And I you know, sometimes it's just like an automatism I have. Like when I pass someone, I try to like remember their like general shape of their head, you know, and try to like reconstruct it and like hold the face in my mind, like as I pass them, right? If I like see if I can still remember that face when I get home, for example, right? It's
wow.
maybe a bit weird, you know. You're not supposed to stare at people, so do that, you know, at your own risk.
Yeah, that's like outstanding skill to have. Like that's also when I was drawing just small sketches, I wanted to do that. No, that's out of my comfort zone. Yeah.
And
Okay.
yeah, I go a lot like outside. When I was in school, instead of just going, yeah, after school, you know, when I did illustration school, often instead of going home straight after school, I just went to like a square, you know, like a town square somewhere, put myself down with my sketchbook and sketch people. I also like what I also did was like, instead of, I used to always take the bike, but I started taking the bus because it would just like give me another hour of drawing time, you know, because I'm not the person who can sit still. So if I'm in a bus, I have to do something, you know, like draw is the best thing. So yeah, it was just like, I just figured, like, I try to trick myself into like drawing more, you know. So I put myself in this situation. If I go out to the town, I put myself somewhere alone. I'm gonna be drawing, you know. Like if I take the bus, I'll be drawing. If I just go home straight away, I'll just go lie on my bed and sleep. So I try to avoid that, you know.
Nice.
I try to like be smarter than like my evening me, you know, the one that wants to just watch movies and be comfortable, you know. I try to like anticipate this person and just like make sure I'm productive.
Yeah, work-life balance. Yeah, everybody needs to learn from it. Okay, we are running out of time, so I really sadly need to end this. But
right.
we are really glad for you that you came, and please, guys, have a big applause.
Thank you.